Welcome back. Amid the ongoing protests in Sri Lanka, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has now fled the country. That's the latest update coming in, even as the protesters have surrounded his residence. This is according to defense sources that are now indicating this. Remember, the crisis in Sri Lanka lifted a curfew on Saturday, already defied by thousands of people overnight ahead of a mass rally that was planned for later in the day, demanding President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation. That it has been an ongoing issue and a demand by several of these protesters in Sri Lanka as well. But it seems like the president of Sri Lanka has now fled the country. That's the latest information coming in as far as Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is concerned, who has now fled the country as protesters surrounded his house. As we can see on the visuals on our screen right now coming in, his gates have now been overheaded by the people and the protesters on the streets of Sri Lanka. Remember, the Sri Lankan police also had fired tear gas at the protesters in the commercial capital of Colombo to control thousands gathered for one of the largest anti-government marches in the crisis-hit country. My colleague Srinjoy now joins us on this broadcast. Yes, Srinjoy, that's a big update coming in. The Sri Lankan President Gotabaya Rajapaksa fleeing the country.
Well, it's a very difficult situation. He, of course, is an American citizen. But the country for several weeks, maybe even months, has had no food, no fuel, no electricity, no medicines. So naturally, people are out on the streets because this basically stems from two problems that happened. It was done in a well-meaning way by Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The first, he decided that there would be no requirement for chemical fertilizers in the country. Now, when you do that, it was this huge shock to the agriculture and system, because then agricultural production plummeted, and also production of tea, where Sri Lanka leads the world, also plummeted. So as a result, there was no food in Sri Lanka, and exports actually came down to virtually zero. So after that, there was this decision by Gotabaya Rajapaksa, again well-meaning, not to have any tourists into the country. So as a result, this was because of COVID. Now, as a result of that, what happened was, again, there was no foreign exchange. So Sri Lanka has no money to buy fuel, to buy petrol, to buy diesel. So as a result, there is a huge shortage. They have a day's supply of petrol or something at this point. India has helped. India has helped as much as possible, and India is continuing to help, being a close neighbor. India does not want a friend and a neighbor in trouble. So India is helping. But the problem is so acute, and this involves 70 million people. It's not going to be easy. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, of course, sacked his brother, elder brother, Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was Prime Minister, and got in Vikram Singh. But again, that has not really helped, because the problems have remained. The problems have not been solved. So if the problems are not solved, then regardless of who you get as Prime Minister or who is President, there will still be trouble on the streets. There is hunger, there is shortage of food, fuel, electricity, medicines. You go to a hospital, there are no medicines. Now, how can we run that?
Yes, absolutely, Srinjoy. My colleague Siddharth also now joins us on this broadcast. So Siddharth, this is an island of 22 million people that is still struggling under a severe foreign exchange shortage that has limited essential imports of fuel, food and medicines, plunging its worst ever financial turmoil in 7 decades, and now the president himself fleeing the country.
Absolutely, and the visuals that you see right now on your screen, Richa, are very close to Colombo Fort, which is where the offices of the serving president Gotabaya Rajapaksa are located. You can see people having broken through barricades and even standing atop the gates that surround the offices as well as the residence of the Sri Lankan president. And this has been building up for quite some time. Remember that the protesters had already planned to march on to this particular area, which is the 9th of July, which is today, and the Colombo Fort Police had in fact approached the courts for relief. They had in fact claimed that since the protesters would be marching on to what is a VVIP secure corridor zone, the court should in fact restrain the protesters from doing so. The court refused to do it. And what you're seeing now is an outcome of the relief to the protesters that had been granted by the court in Sri Lanka a few days ago. They've gone right next to the residence of the President of Sri Lanka, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who's been embattled for a very long period of time, ever since April, when the scale and magnitude of the crisis that Sri Lanka was facing became evident. Remember, there were calls for his resignation. All that has been done so far is that the Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, his brother Mahinda Rajapaksa has resigned, and Ranil Wickremesinghe has taken over. But there are repeated calls for the resignation of the current serving President, I beg your pardon, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and there are reports now that he's fled this residence following a series of protests that have now in fact descended upon his house in Colombo Fort in the capital of Colombo.
Absolutely, Siddharth, because as we have been getting in these two set of visuals, one from outside the residence of Gotabaya and the President House that has been surrounded. Remember, the Sri Lankan police fired tear gas at the protesters on Saturday in the commercial capital of Colombo to control thousands and thousands that are gathered for one of the largest anti-government marches in the crisis-hit country this year. Thousands of demonstrators also packed in buses, trains and trucks from across the South Asian nation entered Colombo to express outrage of the government's failure to protect them from the economic ruin. And thank you, Siddharth and Srinjoy, for getting us the latest. We'll keep a close watch on that. Time now for a short break.